Okay, so this video might need a bit of an intro. On August 18th, 2020, I uploaded my very first Epic Mickey video to my original Animations Down Under YouTube channel, which is now Animations Down Under Archives. And for the 4th anniversary, I thought I'd take a page out of Purple Lamp's book and remake the first video with all new opinions and events. There's a few things have happened to Epic Mickey since 2020, so enjoy. So, if you're one of the people who watched my first video, which is now private, you'll know that I said I was going to do reviews as well as life stories, which I only did one of. Well, when I said that, I only really had one game in mind to review, Big Disney's 2010 video game, Epic Mickey. Now, before I get into this, just keep in mind that I'm not a very experienced gamer. I actually bought a Wii just so I could play Epic Mickey, and a big contributing factor for me buying a Nintendo Switch was so I could play Epic Mickey Rebrushed. So, don't expect any critiques on how the gameplay sucks compared to The Legend of Zelda. So without further ado, let's talk about this series. The game was developed by Junction Point Studios, although the origin of the game doesn't involve them at all. It was actually the concept of a 2004 Disney think tank, where the interns there were tasked with making Mickey Mouse cool again. The pitch display told the story of Mickey Mouse falling into a world for forgotten characters from Disney projects of old, and leading said world was Walt Disney's first cartoon star, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The Disney company loved the idea that they came up with, but there were a few caveats to get it into development, the biggest one being Oswald himself. You see, Oswald was not owned by Disney at the time, rather by Universal Pictures, since the contract Walt had signed in 1927 gave all ownership to Universal, who still owned him nearly 80 years later. So Bob Iger did what any rational human would do, and traded the cartoon rabbit Oswald for the living, breathing human Al Michaels, who was commentating for ESPN's Monday Night Football, which Disney owns. Don't worry though, Al Michaels wasn't too cut up about it. From what I've read, he was already looking for a way to break ties with ESPN and move to NBC Universal Sunday Night Football, and he said he'll be a trivia answer someday. So now that Disney had the rabbit, they needed a developer. So they did what corporate Disney does best, and bought out Junction Point Studios to develop the game, led by Warren Spector, who most people know for working on Deus Ex. Throughout the 4-year development of Epic Mickey, there were ideas that were scrapped like with every game, but the game that the public saw in 2010 was pretty much the game that was planned throughout the development process. Although based on the first information we got in Epic Mickey, you probably wouldn't think so, because the first bit of Epic Mickey info dished out to the public was these horrifying bits of concept art. Keep in mind that the game hadn't even been officially revealed yet, let alone be given a trailer, so it gave people the wrong impression on what Disney was cooking over in their game division. So when the game came out, and it was a lot more child-friendly than the concept art, most people assumed that the concept art was Warren's true vision for Epic Mickey, and the final game had been a result of studio interference. This was not true. As said by Warren during a Reddit AMA, that concept art was leaked, and never intended for public consumption. I had the team do that because I needed to know where the line of acceptability was for Disney, what they would be comfortable with, and what they wouldn't be comfortable with. The way to find a line is to cross it, by a lot. Do something that's really out there and have them go, no, too far. And then something a little less radical, and less radical, until frankly, you get where you want and they don't even realize you've gotten there. I think we push things further darkness-wise than anyone ever thought possible. Will a game in that crazy, over-the-top dark as the pit style ever see the light of day? Probably not from Disney. Personally, I think the final state of the game was just dark enough for a Disney game. If you went too dark, I feel like Epic Mickey would just feel like a parody of itself, much like a certain slasher film that released this year. The game was finally officially revealed in October of 2009, and saw its official release on November 25th, 2010, with an official launch party occurring at the Disney Store in Times Square. Also alongside the game, there was an official graphic novel and a short prequel series released. I go much more in detail in another video. The game was released exclusively on the Nintendo Wii to mixed to positive reviews, mostly all saying pretty much the same thing. The narrative and the characterization was on point, although the gameplay elements, like the 3D and 2D platforming, wasn't exactly revolutionary, and the camera was an utter train wreck. And I agree with most of these points. Like I said, I'm not exactly a very experienced gamer, so the conventional platforming doesn't bother me too much. And the camera didn't really bother me that much either, though I am manually adjusting it constantly, to the point where I just do it out of habit now. I know the motion controls, where you have to constantly point the Wii Remote at the screen to move the cursor to paint and thin things, can be undesirable for some people, but I don't really mind it. It definitely immerses you more into the world, and I'll probably be using motion controls on Rebrushed when it launches. The sketches are a nice addition, although I find I rarely use them outside of their introductory stage. For instance, you don't use the watch sketch a whole lot outside of when you initially use it in Tortuga, and both the TV and anvils are only used outside Tomorrow City and Lonesome Manor for pin hunting and the like. Where the game really shines is its story. The game does a great job of making you feel for all these forgotten characters, since their home has been ravaged by the blot. Oswald in particular is very well characterized, as the original star of the Disney studio, only to be tossed aside and be replaced by a soon-to-be iconic mouse. You honestly see where he's coming from, even if he does act like a jerk most of the time. A central mechanic in Epic Mickey's story is that it is defined by the player, in the sense that you can choose to either make Wasteland a better place with paint, or be a total jerk who destroys everything in their path. And honestly, the game doesn't really do enough with it. The only changes that are really made are the background music, the NPC's animations, and the cutscene at the end, none of which actually affect the gameplay. So overall, I'd give OG Epic Mickey a solid gold star. Not everything's how it'd ideally be, but what works really well, enough to look past its flaws. Epic Mickey sold very well during its initial release, with the online Disney store running out of copies in just a few hours. It sold 2.8 million copies, which I think is pretty good going. Not that I know anything about game sales statistics, but 2.8 mil sounds like a fair amount. So with the relative success of the first Epic Mickey, of course Disney had to go and make another one, which was released just over 2 years after the original, and it shows. Epic Mickey 2 The Power of Two, released on the 18th of November 2012. Instead of just being on the Wii, this one was available on Xbox 360, PS3, Wii U, and later on the PS Vita and PC. I played the Wii version, and to be honest, it's alright. The gameplay is pretty much the same, with the same flaws, although now you have Oswald following you everywhere, either controlled by an AI or a second player, with its own special abilities. Now, in the first game, the big complaint was about the camera. In the second, it's Oswald's AI. I don't think it's that bad on the Wii, although it does take a bit for him to go where Mickey wants him to. But on PC, which I've played a little bit of, Oswald's AI is not great. The last thing you have to do in Dark Beauty Castle is use Oswald's remote to shock some fireworks. And it took him forever just to do that simple task. I probably spent 5 or so minutes moving the fireworks around in an attempt for Oswald to recognize the fireworks was there. Oh, and there is one new sketch introduced in Epic Mickey 2. Being the fairy sketch, which, again, is barely used outside of its introductory level of Oztown. Now, Epic Mickey 1 made up for its lackluster gameplay and its story. Did Epic Mickey 2 do the same? Well, no. The story is very basic, with a twist villain who is quite obviously evil from the start, and also does a full 360 on his personality in the first game, but I won't go into it here. I've also got a video talking about that. And as for the choice and consequence system, it's the same, with no major impact on the gameplay, aside from non-essential bits of levels being blocked off if you don't fix the train stations. In fact, I'd argue that the system's gotten worse. In the first game, the game directs you to all the missions and side quests needed to achieve the good ending, mostly via an item called Power Sparks, which you need to repair the projector portals to other stages. In Epic Mickey 2, however, the game doesn't do this. It's entirely possible to miss entire side quests needed to get a good ending, just because you have to backtrack to find them. I know I've missed them more than once. But overall, I still enjoy the game, so I'll give it a participation trophy for its effort. A lot of the negative things about Epic Mickey 2 were due to the time constraint on the development, since Disney wanted this thing out ASAP, leading to devs having to drastically shorten things. So, alongside the release of Epic Mickey 2, a spin-off developed by Dream Rift Studios was released, titled Epic Mickey Power of Illusion, for the Nintendo 3DS. This game is a 2D platformer, and is basically a spiritual successor to the Castle of Illusion series from the 1990s. Back in my original 2020 video, I said I really didn't like this as much as the other two games, but recently I started playing it again, and it's actually a really good game, at least in the first level and a bit that I've played. The way of translating the paint thinner mechanics to the 3DS are really well done, with thinnable and paintable items appearing on the lower screen, which allows Mickey to select one and trace the outline to paint it in, or just erase it out. I do find myself running out of paint a lot of the time though, so that's a tad annoying. The story is very bare bones, loosely following the plot of Castle of Illusion, with some Epic Mickey thrown in there for good measure. A mysterious castle shows up in Wasteland, ruled by Mizrabel, who won't accept being forgotten and kidnaps all the popular Disney characters to try and get a heart of her own so she can be remembered. But in contrast with the other Epic Mickey games, the gameplay makes up for the lackluster story. Choice and consequence is practically absent in this game, with even its most basic use in the other two games, destroying and befriending enemies, it's not there. Using paint and thinner just changes what the enemy drops. And I don't mind it. It suits the game, and I'd rather have no choice and consequence than have it shoved in there somewhere awkwardly where it doesn't belong. Unlike the other Epic Mickey games, I've never actually completed Power of Illusion, so I can't really give it a wholly accurate review. But from what I've played, it's a lot of fun, although it supposedly gets really difficult as time goes on. For now, I'll give it a thumbs up. And that was the end of Epic Mickey. Disney shut down Junction Point as it moved towards mobile gaming instead of consoles, and the Epic Mickey series died with it. Or did it? In around 2020 or so, some Epic Mickey clothing items were released into retail, plus some Epic Mickey 2 prototypes were found and shown up by a YouTuber called Hard for Games. At the time, as a desperate Epic Mickey fan desperate for more Epic Mickey content, I thought that maybe these events were a secret ploy by Disney to see whether there was enough demand for a reboot, which probably wasn't the case, but it doesn't matter, since on February 22nd, 2024, we got the announcement of a brand new Epic Mickey game. The game, which is going to be released on all of the modern consoles, is a remake of the original Epic Mickey, with all new assets and hidden areas. And it looks like it's shaping up to be a great game, and you bet I'll be there day one, playing the first brand new Epic Mickey game in 12 years.
We've had nothing to do with the past few weeks, so we're doing this guy's end card. So the link for all the clips that were used in this video are in the description. Also, there'll be a lot of variety of animations on this channel. Also, subscribe, because every subscriber helps, supports the channel, and encourages the animator to do more. So, see you later, pals.